This is Answer to Job, class number 11. And the assignment covers paragraphs 734 through 747. I want to begin first with a few items left over from last assignment. First one is the eternal gospel, which is found in Revelation 14, 6-7, which reads, "And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God and give glory to him." This is an important feature of Revelation for Jung. He speaks of it several places, but one place he speaks of it is paragraph 733. Where he says, "Would anyone in his right senses deny that John correctly foresaw at least some of the possible dangers which threaten our world in the final phase of the Christian eon? He knew also that the fire in which the devil is tormented burns in the divine pleroma forever. God has a terrible double aspect. The sea of grace is met by a seething lake of fire, and the light of love flows with the fierce dark heat, of which it is said, Art it known lucid, it burns but gives no light. That is the eternal as distinct from the temporal gospel. One can love God, but must fear him." He's enunciating a very basic principle of his thought in this paragraph. This statement replaces the naive assumption that God is a conscious and all-loving being. The eternal gospel means that it refers to beyond time. The eternal gospel as opposed to temporal gospel. A corollary to this principle that one can love God under certain favorable circumstances, but must fear him. Corollary to that would state that anxiety is an expression of proximity to God. This is a very helpful orienting principle. I'm not sure why people are laughing. You'll have an opportunity to explain it to me in the discussion. See, this is a very helpful orienting principle, because once you grasp its reality, you've immediately shifted your the level at which you're understanding your experience from the personal to the transpersonal. Once you really get it, that anxiety is a manifestation of proximity to God, then any other more personal explanations of the experience, while having some validity, of course, will be swallowed up by the deeper meaning. The other thing that Jung says here is that God's terrible double aspect is composed of a sea of grace which is met by a seething lake of fire. I find it helpful to represent that formulation in the abbreviated form I've indicated on the board. SOG signifies sea of grace. LOF signifies lake of fire. They're all oriented around the center O. And when you chord it that way, you then see that you've got two triangles pointing in opposite directions. You've got a sea of grace, a triangle pointing downwards, and a lake of fire, triangle pointing upwards, that corresponds to the alchemical emblems that I've indicated on the side. A downward pointing triangle in alchemy signifies water, and an upward pointing triangle signifies fire. And when you combine the two in the paradoxical union of fire and water, you get that so-called Solomon's seal, Star of David. See, that's what we have here when you combine the sea of grace with the lake of fire. And that's Jung is referring to this as the God image. This is the nature of the God image. If any of you have any doubts how closely you live right on the brink of the lake of fire, you can demonstrate to yourself in only a few seconds by exhaling and continuing to exhale until you can't stand it anymore, and you will immediately plunge into the lake of fire. That's all it takes. It's right there in your physiology. Okay, the next item. The Whore of Babylon. This is referred to in the 17th chapter of Revelation. Chapter 1-6. And there came one of the seven angels which had the seven vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of the fornication. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman is arrayed in purple and scarlet color, decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand. full of abominations and filthiness of fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Now Jung says about this image in paragraph 721, is this great whore of Babylon, the counterpart of the heavenly Jerusalem. Heavenly Jerusalem is the great city man figure that we would come to at the very end of Jerusalem. Revelation. Great whore of Babylon is the counterpart of the heavenly Jerusalem. The whore is the chthonic equivalent of the sun woman Sophia, with, however, a reversal in moral character. If the elect turn themselves into virgins in honor of the great mother Sophia, the gruesome fantasy of fornication is spawned in the unconscious by way of compensation. What we have here is the negative version of the personification of the city archetype. The heavenly Jerusalem is a positive version of the city archetype, and the whore of Babylon is the negative version. It brings up a whole rich symbolism of the city. The city is a symbolic image of the feminine aspect of the self. Babylon is its chthonic, dark, secular version as compared with the heavenly Jerusalem, which is its heavenly, spiritual, divine version. You know, Aristotle said that man is the political animal. He wasn't referring to politics as we think of it. He was referring to the fact that man lives in a polis, a city, that it's characteristic of the human condition to live in the city. And that's why the very word civilization has its roots. The word means city. The city is the mother of its inhabitants. So that the metropolis means literally the mother city. So when you read the metro section of the LA Times, you're reading about the city archetype in its local manifestation. See, in the Hebrew scriptures, two great symbolic cities are Babylon and Jerusalem. Jerusalem was the holy sacred city, and Babylon was the despicable secular city, because it was a city of captivity, a city of vice and luxury. It was the city that was hated by the Jews. It's all spelled out in Psalm 137. It's a captivity psalm. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. Zion means Jerusalem. We hanged our harps upon the willows in the midst thereof, for there they had carried us away captives. Required of us a song. They that wasted us required of us mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? But forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget her cunning. etc. O daughter of Babylon, who art to be destroyed, happy shall he be that rewardeth thee as thou hast deserved. Raise it even to the foundation thereof. Happy shall he be that taketh and dasheth thy little ones against the stones. Babylon, from this period on, is a despicable city to be destroyed. And in Revelation, that symbolism is applied to Rome. Which was the city that contained the whole civilized world at that time. And John correctly predicted the fall of Rome, although it happened several centuries after he expected it. Augustine wrote a massive essay on the archetype of the city called the City of God. His basic idea is that history is divided by two cities that are formed by two alternative loves. The earthly city, created by creatures' love of themselves, and the heavenly city, created by the love of God. One group wants to live after the flesh, and the other after the spirit. He specifically cites the heavenly Jerusalem as an example of the city of God, and Babylon as the example of the earthly city. And psychologically, we would understand that dichotomy to refer the earthly city to refer to the ego, and the heavenly city to the self. It's very interesting that although the emerging split Christian mentality that was identifying with the spirit was denigrating the earthly city profoundly in this negative appraisal. Still, it's very interesting that in spite of that, the whore of Babylon is holding the golden cup, the image of supreme value. You may remember from the Mysterium seminar that the same image comes up in Ripley's Candelina, where the pregnant queen drank the blood of the green lion out of the golden cup of Babylon. See, alchemy is here assimilated. The golden cup of Babylon, plucked it right out of Revelation, put it into an alchemical text. See, the golden cup is symbolically equivalent to the Holy Grail. The presence of the golden cup in the hands of the whore indicates that she's carrying the symbolism of the self, even though it's the intention of the author to denigrate her as much as possible. All right, next item. Chapters 19 and 20, we read about a final battle, then a resurrection of the dead, the last judgment being meted out, and then reference to the book of life. The idea of resurrection would suggest that all repressed contents of the collective psyche are to be brought into view and accounted for. It's the idea that sooner or later the individual has to take responsibility for all repressed contents. You don't get away with anything in the long run. I think all our psychological data verify that fact. In the short run, yes. But in the long run, no. There's a book of life that people are measured by. Find that in Revelation 20, 12 to 15. And I saw the dead, small and great, stand before God. These are the dead that have been resurrected. And the books were opened. And another book was opened, which is the book of life. And the dead were judged out of those things which were written in the books according to their works. And whoever was not found written in the book of life cast into the lake of fire. This same image comes up in a little different context in the 10th chapter of Luke, where Christ says to his disciples, "Rejoice not that the spirits are subject to you, but rather rejoice because your names are written in heaven." That's another reference to having your name written in the book of life. This image comes up in dreams every now and then. The book, the image of the big book. And whenever you come across it, you can think of this particular passage. I understand the image as being a picture of one's definitive relation to the self. So far as we can perceive, so far as our experience goes, there's no automatic guarantee at all that if one lives a life in continual violation of the realities of the self, that he'll eventually be forgiven. There isn't any evidence of that at all. The whole question of, are there indeed damned souls, when understood psychologically? In other words, is it possible to be permanently banished by the self because of an ego life that's so egregiously in violation of the self that it's unredeemable? We can't answer that question in the final sense, but my impression that yes, indeed, there are such things with souls. Then comes the end of the book of Revelation with the grand image of the heavenly Jerusalem descending from heaven. Starting in the 21st chapter of Revelation, verse 10. He carried me away in the spirit to a great and high mountain, showed me that great city, the holy Jerusalem, descending out of heaven from God, like a jasper stone, clear as crystal. The wall had 12 gates. On the east, 3 gates. On the north, 3 gates. On the south, 3 gates. On the west. See, it's a great mandala image. And it was 4 square, 12,000 furlongs in each direction. It was made of jasper, pure gold, all manner of precious stones, sapphire, chalcedony, emerald, sardonyx, etc. 12 gates with 12 pearls, where we get the idea of the pearly gates of heaven. The streets of the park, pure gold. And there was no temple there, where the Lord God Almighty are the temple of it. And then starting in the 22nd chapter, pure river of the water of life proceeded out of the throne of God, flowed through the city. And the tree of life was blooming on it. And then he speaks of the marriage of the Lamb with the heavenly Jerusalem. Jung says about this in paragraph 727. After describing it just the way I've described it, he goes on to compare it with the vision of Ezekiel. Says that refers to the fourfold synthesis of unconscious luminosities, of which the description of the heavenly city reminds us. Everything sparkles with precious gems, crystal, in complete accordance with Ezekiel's vision. Just as the Hyros Gamos unites Yahweh with Sophia, thus restoring the original paradigmatic state, so the parallel description of God and city points to their common nature. They are originally one, a single hermaphroditic being, an archetype of greatest universality. So what we have here then is a final conjunctio image in which the heavenly city is married to the sacred Lamb. That's the final conjunctio. And that particular imagery then showed up in Jung's grand conjunctio vision. He describes in memories. Next item, I want to draw your attention to Mark Jung makes back paragraph 716. Which is formulates an important operative principle, I think. It says here, as a totality, the self is by definition always a complexio positorum. And the more consciousness insists on its own luminous nature and lays claim to moral authority, the more the self will appear as something dark and menacing. We see in the book of Revelation, the self appears as something profoundly dark and menacing. And we get small versions of this scenario in dreams that we encounter all the time. Threatening dreams. I think we can say regularly that threatening dreams have at least some faint reference to Revelation imagery. And the first thing one has to look for then is what is the nature of the conscious attitude that is constellating a dark and menacing response from the unconscious. Jung tells us here that the more consciousness insists on its own luminous nature, lays claim to moral authority, more it's convinced of its rightness. So, the more the self will appear as something dark. Right, another item. You will have noticed that Jung gives John a double interpretation. First on paragraph 7. As he's talking about the Revelation, we no longer recognize the meek lamb who lets himself be led unresistingly to the slaughter. There is only the aggressive and irascible ram whose rage can at last be vented. In all this, I see less a metaphysical mystery than the outburst of long pent-up negative feelings, such as can frequently be observed in people who strive for perfection. And it goes on to say that John 708. 708. So there he's giving us a personalistic interpretation of the rageful state of affairs in the book of Revelation. But then we turn over to paragraph 717, and he's changed his tune. Now he says, but John's problem was not a personal one. It was not a question of personal unconscious or of an outburst of ill humor, but of visions which came up from a far greater and more comprehensive depths, namely from the collective unconscious. The problem expresses itself far too much in collective and archetypal forms for us to reduce it to a merely personal situation. To do so would be altogether too easy, as well as being wrong in theory and practice. As a Christian, skip on down to the later part. The eye of John penetrates into the distant future of the Christian eon and into the dark abyss of those forces which his Christianity kept in equilibrium. Burst upon him is the storm of the times, the premonition of a tremendous enantiodromia. Well, how are we to understand this apparent reversal? You know, this isn't the only time, the only occasion that Jung can be accused of being inconsistent. You can almost say he's consistently inconsistent. And that's because he's always keenly aware of the operation of the opposites. You see, both interpretations are right. That's the point. Both the personal and the archetypal are appropriate. And which one is to be emphasized in a given situation often depends on clinical judgment. But especially whenever one has dream material that has clear collective imagery, as of course the book of Revelation certainly does. That tells us right away that the issue is more than a personal one. That doesn't mean it's not personal. It just means it's more than a personal one. But in order to cue in on an archetypal or collective issue, one has to have at least a smattering of the same matter in his personal psychology too, to open the gate. And that's usually easy enough since we are individually members of the collective psychic circumstance that surrounds us. Therefore, its issues are going to penetrate us to a greater or lesser extent personally also. But the point is that both are right, and Jung shows us just how he might proceed with a dream interpretation. Start out examining the personal dimension of the symbolism, and then perceiving that the imagery isn't adequately explained on the personal level. And he goes on to say, but this isn't enough to explain this imagery, and then you go on to the archetypal interpretation. All right. Paragraph 738. Jung says this: paradoxical nature of God has a like effect on man. It tears him asunder into opposites and delivers him over to a seemingly insoluble conflict. What happens in such a condition? There are, for example, conflicts of duty no one knows how to solve. Consciousness only knows tertium non datur. A third is not given. The doctor therefore advises his patient to wait and see whether the unconscious will not produce a dream which proposes an irrational and therefore unexpected third thing as a solution. As experience shows, symbols of a reconciling and unitive nature do in fact turn up in dreams. Images that signify the union of opposites. See, I said earlier that symptom of anxiety is a manifestation of the proximity of God. Jung is now adding to that statement another proposition, namely that the state of conflict is the symptom of proximity of God. It means one is in the vicinity of the paradoxical godness. And proximity to that has the effect of tearing him asunder into opposites. When that happens, the prescription is wait. Endure and wait for the third. The same issue continued, paragraph 739. The opposition between God and man in Christian view may well be a Yahwistic legacy from olden times, when the metaphysical problem consisted solely in Yahweh's relations with his people. Fear of Yahweh was still too great for anybody to dare, despite Job's gnosis, to lodge the antinomy in deity itself. But if you keep the opposition between God and man, then you arrive, whether you like it or not, at the Christian conclusion: all good from God, all bad from man. the absurd result, the creature is placed in opposition to the Creator, and a positively cosmic or demonic grandeur in evil is imputed to man. Now here's another very important Jungian principle. The principle is that the opposites reside in the God image. That means good and evil, as well as all the other opposites, are attributes of the God image itself. If the ego falls into an identification with either one of a pair of opposites, it then is on its way to this absurd result that Jung is speaking of. That's easy enough to state, but I don't think it's so easy to integrate and apply in your actual psychological life. Because all the early development of the ego teaches it to take responsibility for everything that goes on in the psyche. So that to make the radical transition of positing the opposites in the God image rather than the ego is a revolutionary change in attitude. Paragraph 740. A very important statement here. Wonderful statement. Yahweh's decision to become man is a symbol of the development of happy superbeing when man becomes conscious of the sort of God image he is confronted with. God acts out of the unconscious of man and forces him to harmonize and unite the opposing influences to which his mind is exposed from the unconscious. The unconscious wants both to divide and to unite. In striving for unity, therefore, man may always count on the help of a metaphysical advocate, as Job clearly recognized. The unconscious wants to flow into consciousness in order to reach the light, but at the same time it continually thwarts itself because it would rather remain unconscious, because it's composed of opposites. That's why it does its contradictory thing. That is to say, God wants to become man, but not quite. Finally, on paragraph 746, I know another remark. The only thing that really matters now is whether a man can climb up to a higher moral level, to a higher plane of consciousness, in order to be equal to the superhuman powers which the fallen angels have passed into his hands. I think passed is a better translation than played. Passed into his hands. Fallen angels handed them over. It's sense. And then finally, at the end of paragraph 747, there's this pregnant statement. Since he has been granted an almost godlike power, he can no longer remain blind and unconscious. He must know something of God's nature and of metaphysical processes, if he is to understand himself and thereby achieve gnosis of the divine. So, in practical terms, I take that to mean that whenever we are presented, almost always, there are exceptions, of course, almost always when we are presented with archetypal dreams from our patients, it's really our obligation to bring in the so-called metaphysical dimension of the individual's existence, because the dreams are asking that if that level be brought in. Those dreams are examples of fallen angels passing on this divine knowledge to the ego. It's important that the ego pick up on what's being passed to him and turn away from it. Okay.